Hey there, winos. This is Vince.Wine. And today I am here with my good friend Erik Wait. He is teaching me about whiskey.
So Vince and I actually go all the way back to September, October 2013, and we both passed the Certified Sommelier exam in March 2014, and 99.99% of our training was on wine. This much was about whiskey and cocktails, which is why Vince doesn't know so much about whiskey. But after I became a certified sommelier, got the WSET diploma, I then got the whiskey bug and took a whole nother route and got into whiskey. So really happy to meet up again with my buddy Vince, and we're going to get into some whiskeys.
You got a couple certifications, not just you. You got a few. We got more than one. How many certifications do you have?
Too many. So I'm a certified sommelier with Quartermaster Sommeliers. I have a French wine scholar at the Wine Scholar Guild. I have a diploma from the Wine Spirit Educational Trust. I have a diploma from the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy. I have a certification from the Whiskey Marketing School down in Texas, and I'm a certified Scotch professional with the Council of Whiskey Masters. There you go. Oh, I also have a degree in enology and winemaking because I went back to college and studied winemaking as well. So there you go.
I'm a certified sommelier.
There you go. But that's the most important thing. Check that out.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Yeah. How many times did you rub this hoping a genie would come out?
So this is a little still. Basically, you heat it up here. You would put in your beer into here. It would heat up. It then starts to evaporate, go up the neck into the line arm, and then condenses in a condenser. So it goes back into a liquid, and then you start all over again. So that is basically what distillation is. With, say, rum, you're starting with a sugar base, right? Either it's going to be cane sugar or a derivative such as molasses. With a brandy, you're starting with a wine, which starts with grapes without a sugar base. So in whiskey, you're starting with a grain, so you don't already have that sugar. So you first have to convert the starch in a grain into something that has sugar, and that is what's called malting. Now, you have 3,000 plus different grapes in wine. When you talk about whiskey, you're basically talking about 4 different grains, like a barley, malted barley. You're talking about corn. You're talking about wheat and rye. When you talk about Scotch, the corvet is going to be barley, malted barley, as well as Irish whiskey. And then with bourbon, at the corvet, you're talking about corn for making bourbon. So that then sets the trajectory as to what kind of whiskey you have. It's going to be, where is it made? What is the core base ingredient? What kind of grain is it? And what is the process by which it's made, whether in a pot still or a column still? And then what kind of casks are you using? And that's going to give you the final outcome of what your whiskey is going to talk about.
Ooh, yeah, there are so many variations here that sounds like it could make all different impacts and flavor, right? All of these things.
Absolutely,
huge range, right? So it sounds like as diverse as wine can be with every decision, if not more. Is that
well? Actually, whiskey is actually far easier than wine. You're only talking 4 ingredients. There's over 1,500 grape varieties in Italy alone.
Right, yeah.
How many different classifications? How many different regions, sub-regions? How many different rules and regulations? So it's actually a lot easier. I mean, in Scotland, there are only 120 distilleries. There's over 400 wineries in the Napa Valley alone.
Right.
So the whiskey world is actually a lot smaller than the wine world. So it's actually a lot easier. And yet, from those basic, simple ingredients, the complexity that you can get out of a whiskey is absolutely mind-blowing, which is why I fell in love with it.
Perfect. Well, so we know what whiskey is now. So why don't we take a look at what are some really classic examples of whiskey that, as a beginner, somebody who just absolutely doesn't even know how to taste whiskey, what's a great place for a newbie like me to start? And we should also focus on how to taste whiskey, because that's really something I just don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's begin where whiskey began, which is in Ireland.
Cue the bloom, 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 bloom.
So this is a Redbreast 12 single pot Irish whiskey. It's a combination of both malted and unmalted barley. Ireland's been making, at least 100 years before Scotland, Scotland officially, according to the date we know, is about 1494. Ireland probably around 1405. However, whiskey probably dates all the way back to around the early 11th century. This is just what we know from written records. All right, so let's get into Irish whiskey.
Cool. Let's do it.
All right. Just fill in the freaking table. So, in the approach to whiskey, for someone who isn't new to whiskey, and if you're accustomed to drinking beers and wines, you know, a high alcohol wine, what would you consider to be a high alcohol wine?
Zinfandel Passerollas. Right?
And what would the ABV be?
Probably 16%.
Right, and that's really, really high. I mean, you're going into almost fortified wine category with that.
Oh, yeah.
Whiskey is bare minimum 40 ABV. Okay. 40% alcohol by volume, which means it's more than twice of your typical wine, let alone beers. So if you're new to it, approach a whiskey like a hot cup of coffee. You don't want to slam a hot cup of coffee, right? Because you burn your nose and your mouth. If you're new to whiskey, kind of approach it with that same approach, or very gently on the nose.
Okay, cool. Is there a special name for this glass here?
Oh, this is so. By the way, in terms of glasses, this is called a Glencairn. You can drink it out of a wine glass, but this is generally recognized in the industry as being ideal. So just like a wine glass, it bulbs out right here. This is your headspace. Where you're smelling out of a whiskey glass is not the base, but as it evaporates, it's right in the middle. And that's the same for wine glasses as well. You have that, you don't fill up a wine glass all the way to the top because you need that headspace, because that's where you're gonna get your aeration from. And the same goes for a whiskey glass as well.
So I'm wanting to hold this from like the stem, if you will, because I don't want to like warm it up. Do I hold it from up here more? Is there a special?
You can hold it any way you want to. Okay. The only thing main thing you don't want to do, and I see this a lot, you know how with wine you kind of swirl the glass to get the wine on the glass and that drips down. Then you're smelling it as it aerates. Don't do that with a whiskey. If you want to do anything, just turn it to the side and kind of give it a slow roll. And as it starts to run back down the glass, if you want to, you can make observations about the legs. Legs are going to tell you in terms of thickness, they're going to tell you something about the alcohol and how much alcohol you have. Okay. But it's not a major factor. But you don't want to swirl it. If you swirl your whiskey glass, you're going to exaggerate the alcohol.
So it brings out all the heat.
Yeah, you're just going to get a nose full of heat. So I highly recommend not swirling. Now, approach it gently, because I'm used to it. If you're new to it, otherwise you're gonna be like, whoa! All right, and don't just take a slight whiff. Okay. So what can happen if you hold it there too long? Your eyeballs will start watering up. You start blinking like this, you know. So I tend to get nice. Don't give it a big. You don't need to get a big snort. You don't need to but just a slight whiff, and then pull the glass away. Okay. And then I kind of exhale, kind of breathe in and exhale. Now, the intensity of the nose is going to be dependent on the ABV. This is at 40% ABV, which is the bare minimum. Gotcha. But if you're new to spirits, that 40 ABV can seem really high. If you're frequently drinking whiskeys, that's actually going to seem kind of low. Oh, wow. So, what basically do you get on the nose on this?
Yeah, I'll tell you, just from taking the nose immediately, it kind of came off a little bit like, it reminded me a little bit of like older white wine in a way. So I was getting some of those like orangey kind of things, marzipan-y kind of things, right? Maybe, I think like orange and like, sort of, not all the way to nutty, but it does remind me of like an aged Chardonnay or something, right? Like I'm getting some of those kind of like fall things.
Almost, or sometimes like, a barrel fermented and barrel aged Chardonnay, so you get that heavy oak extraction there, and which then gives you some of the spices. Now, I get a little bit of vanilla. I get some baking spices in there.
Okay, what about like right now I'm getting something fruity, almost like apricot or something like that. So I'm getting apricots, very like stone fruit kind of things that are coming out of there.
Now I get some apple and pear, but it's an apple that's been open for a while. Maybe you cut it open and you set it on the countertop, and it's starting to turn out a little bit of a brown character.
And you know what? I'm catching up with you on the baking spices, because as soon as you said apple, I'm thinking like a baked apple pie, right? So it's got like those almost not all the way to cinnamon, but maybe a little clovey, right?
Which is a lot like an older Chardonnay, or a Chardonnay that's been sort of barrel fermented. You get that heavier more intense sort of apple character.
Yeah, and there's like a sweetness too, right? So there's a sweetness coming off of there, which is really interesting. I didn't expect. I didn't expect sweet, so that's kind of, and that may not translate into the palate, but certainly, it's coming off on the nose. It's making me think of like kind of like hovering over the windowsill with a pie, right? Yeah, something like that.
So let's try it on the palate. Now to improve the aerodynamics, you know how on an airplane they have a wing at the end of the airplane? There's that thing that sticks up the fin, and that's to reduce the drag on the wing to improve gas mileage. So I like to drink my whiskey with my pinky out to reduce the drag, right? And get more efficiency in going into my palate.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here, winos. All right. Okay, I have interrupted filming because I actually need like a spittoon or a spit bucket or something, because this is going to be like really intense for me.
Now again, approach it like a hot cup of coffee, so you don't just want to slam it on back.
Okay, so and what am I going to do with it when it hits the palate? Am I going to keep it for a minute? Am I going to slurp it anyway? Like, what do I want to do with it?
That's going to be up to you. See, I'm just going to see what your initial reaction is. I do like to hold it for a little bit. I don't swish it. Don't swirl it around your knife. It's going to be so intense.
Okay.
You don't really need to. You don't really need to. Not like a wine where you're going to go.
Right.
Yeah. No sucking of air. Oh no.
Okay.
Just like you don't want to swirl the glass to exaggerate. In contrast to a wine where you might suck in some air to evaluate other.
That's right. That exacerbates the heat. I'm learning. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Cool.
But just like a cup of coffee, you take a small little sip.
Okay. Cool. Hopefully, my initial reaction is spitting it out. So,
all right.
So cheers.
Let's go.
Yeah. Okay.
So what's your first impression? What's the first thing you get?
Heat.
Okay.
So no, I would say that was actually very pleasant when it was on the palate. It's very syrupy on the palate, and not in terms of sweetness, but in consistency. You know.
Okay.
It enveloped it really well, and I was definitely, the flavor was all there. That's where the flavor was. Is when it was on there. That's when I was tasting it the most. And then as soon as kind of came out. I kind of felt like from here, kind of just a rush of sort of like heat.
Now, a lot of times, it's the same thing with wines. Is the first time you put some into your mouth, it can be a little bit of a shock, right? Because you hadn't had anything. So if I'm going to do an actual official tasting, before I actually get into whatever whiskeys we're actually tasting, I'll actually have a warm-up whiskey. So that the first whiskey you have isn't like...
Right, yeah.
First one in the morning, So that was our warm-up. So let's go back in again. And see what we can get out of it.
Okay, cool.
This time, let's hold it a little bit longer.
Hold it longer.
Now, something you can do is, you don't want to slurp it or suck in air, but you can kind of chew on it.
I
try
chewing
saw
on
you
it. Doing, you're like moving
just
your mouth
a little,
bit,
not major. I'm not. This is not
mouthwash.
Yeah. You want to do anything like that.
Okay.
But you can kind of chew on it a little bit and get a little bit more extraction out of it like that. So let's do it. Let's do it a third time. And there's a little phrase we have that we get from the Irish, which is Slange Var, which is like cheers in English.
Slange Var.
Slange Var.
Slange Var. Slange Var.
So that I'm sort of imitating Richard Patterson, who is the master blender for Dalmore and White Mackay. When he's teaching people how to taste, he gets a little
eccentric.
Yes.
Yeah.
He kind of does that over a little bit, but he does. So I was kind of imitating him. If anybody's ever seen him, he also will throw the first amount, cleaning out a glass on the floor. We don't do that in my house.
Okay.
All right. So, are you getting anything different, anything more out of it? You think than you were before?
So I'll tell you, my initial reaction every time. It's actually not the first time I've ever tasted whiskey, even on this channel. You can see my first reaction on this clip. I would say it's always been purely about heat. It really has been purely about heat. And this time I can tell that there is a complexity going on in here.
This is actually a very silky, velvety, buttery mouthfeel in comparison to a lot of other whiskeys. And the reason why they have unmalted barley is because they were being taxed on the malt by the Brits. And so they said, okay, we'll get around that by doing unmalted barley and not have to pay as much taxes. which is where this distinctive Irish style came from, of using unmalted barley. This is probably, I would say, the flagship of Irish whiskeys in terms of style and profile. It's a real classic.
So review this whiskey for me. Break it down for me. What are you getting out of it? Because you've turned to me and I've given you a very amateur review of it. So what are you?
So we mentioned before, describing sort of as apple pie, apple compote. Get a little baking spices, cinnamon, maybe a little bit of nutmeg. I get a lot of that sort of butter cookie, reduced butter sauce on the palate. It has somewhat of a creamy, oily texture to it. There's a mouth-coating feel to it that comes from the unmalted barley. And then on the finish, it finishes with a little bit of woodiness, a little bit of dryness, a little bit of that astringency that you were mentioning before, but it has a nice long, I would say, baking spice forward finish. A really, really nice classic whiskey. It'll do all right on ice. I prefer it neat. And if you want it opened up a little bit more, you could drop a little drop of water in there. That'll sort of break up the oils in the whiskey, and you'll get even more out of it than we just had before.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you. So, what's the deal with that? Like, an ice cube versus water, or why do that?
Well, if you're in Scotland and you're in Ireland in the middle of summer, it's 40 degrees Fahrenheit. How you want to convert that over to Celsius? To them, that's anathema. Here in California, or say in Texas, here it gets 110 degrees out here in the Central Valley. You're gonna want to put ice on it. So, do not let anybody tell you what to drink or how to drink it. You drink it the way you like it.
Drink what you like.
So let's move on to our next one. We could spend an hour just on Irish whiskey, but let's move on to another one. So basically, distillation goes back to about 3000 BC in China. They're using it for water purification. In the Middle East, they were using it for producing perfumes. Then got picked up by a French monk, who then brought it to the Cognac region, Armagnac region. He developed the Alembus still for making brandy. It then made its way over to Ireland, and then from Ireland made it over the Hebrides into Scotland. So now we're going to go over to Scotland.
Let's go to Scotland. Thanks very much.
All right, so our next whiskey is Scotch. Now, Scotch whiskey. Now, in order to be Scotch whiskey, it has to be made in Scotland. It has to be aged for at least 3 years in oak. If it's a single malt Scotch, it has to be bottled in Scotland. So you have several different types of Scotch whiskey. You have single malt, blended whiskey, and grain whiskey. Now, that gets really, really complex as to all the definitions of what that is, but this is a single malt Scotch. A single refers to the distilleries. So it's a single distillery malted barley whiskey. Okay. But that'd be kind of long on the label. So just single malt Scotch, but it's really single distillery malted barley Scotch is what it really, really is.
Gotcha.
This is from Cragganmore. It's up in Speyside. There are 4 different regions. You have the Highlands, Speyside, the Lowlands, Campbellton, 5, and Islay. So you have 5 regions in Scotland. The best whiskeys come from Islay, in my opinion. This is from Speyside, which is at the northeastern corner of Scotland. It's also within the Highlands, so it's sort of a subcategory of the Highlands. This is aged for a minimum of 12 years. So the age date on a bottle of whiskey is the minimum. So it could have some 13, 14, 15, 18, but if it has 1 drop of 10, they would have to go down to a 10-year-old. Okay, yeah. So the age date is just the minimum what's actually in the bottle. Wow. But there are also a lot of Scotch whiskeys that are non-age statement, because they don't give you an indication of the date. There's a long reason for that, which I'm not going to bore you, but they're becoming more popular, and it has to do with right now, Scotch is booming. It's super popular. Supplies aren't quite what they used to be, and so during this time, a non-age statement has become really, really popular. All right. Okay. So, so this is going to be a bourbon cask. 90% of all casks in Scotland are ex-bourbon casks, because bourbon, which we'll get to bourbon in a little bit, bourbon, they can only use the cask once. So what are you going to do with all those casks? Ship them to Scotland, ship them to Ireland, ship them to Japan, ship them somewhere else. where they can reuse them. And some of the distilleries in Scotland and Ireland are owned by the same company that owns a bourbon distillery.
Yeah.
So it's within the same family of distilleries that they're getting reused. So this is ex-bourbon cask, 12-year-old single malt. So it's 100% malted barley.
Okay.
Now, one little caveat in terms of color, because you were asking me about color. It is legal to use in Scotland something called E150A. Coca-Cola uses E150C.
Okay.
That color from Coca-Cola.
Uh-huh.
Okay, basically it's an extract from sugar, just for the coloring. Supposedly, it doesn't change the flavor.
Uh-huh.
It just adds color. Why would they want to add color? Another long history story. There were bodegas in Spain and Jerez that were owned by Scotch families. They're importing sherry casks. They got a lot of this nice dark color out of the sherry cask. People associated that color with age. Consequently, they got used to seeing particular colors for the whiskeys. What they will tell you is they want to have a consistent color from bottle to bottle. So in order to have consistent color, they do a color adjustment, a very minute amount of E150A in order to get a color consistency. Generally, whiskey enthusiasts, we don't need it, we don't want it, and I think eventually it'll go, Lord willing, it'll go away. Yeah, eventually it'll go away. Alrighty, so let's try it on the nose. Again, we want to approach it like we do a hot cup of coffee.
Okay.
So what's the first thing you're getting?
It's lighter, like more fruity almost.
Okay.
Right? It didn't strike me as warm.
But you also might be getting used to it as well. You burned some of those nose hairs out on the first whiskey.
It definitely all gone up in close. Okay.
So
sure.
it also may have acclimated a little bit.
I might have to do one of these and get rid of some of those.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. All right.
This one's more like citrus fruits.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I get orange, sort of a desiccated orange.
Yeah, and it's almost limey.
Yep.
Yeah.
I get a lot of lemon and lime character as well.
I'm getting a little more lime than lemon.
I don't keep my nose there
Oh, that's
because
right.
you can overwhelm your senses. So I smell and then pull it back. So we got some citrus, we got some lemon, some sort of an earth category if you think of evaluating wines, but there's also sort of a slight leafy character in there as well. Yeah, but dried leaves. But it's really citrus forward.
Yeah.
Now it's very subtle and it takes a while to get used to it. But there's sort of a cereal grainy note on the back end. But because the fruit is so intense and all the other aromas are intense, this is like real quiet, but in the background, but there's a malty character. So try this as an experiment. Get some malted milk balls, remove the chocolate off the malted milk balls, and then just try the malty character. And there's a slight note of that inside of a malt whiskey, which then lets you know it's a malt whiskey. It's not a grain whiskey, and it's not a bourbon because you're getting these malty characteristics. But it's so quiet, you might not notice it when you're new to the whiskey.
Okay, the next video, malt ball challenge.
Alrighty. Anything else there?
You tell me.
Right.
This is definitely.
So I do get some baking spices there. I always want to look. So just like with evaluating wine, fruit flowers, earth, spice. I kind of like to stick to a very similar grid to going through whiskeys. You could go lemon blossom, you could kind of orange blossom. You kind of cheat there with the flowers. The same thing got with the citrus on there. But I do get some spice character there. But it's going to be like baking spices, sort of a lighter cinnamon note, a little bit of vanilla. But the citrus is definitely the dominant character on that.
I think one of the things that is a challenge for me is I am still fighting the heat side of it.
Right.
So I can tell that I am trying to determine, what I'm getting beyond that. you
Right.
know. And
Which is why I actually started with this whiskey, because it's another 40% ABV. The Irish whiskey was at 40%. This is at 40%. If I went higher than that, I would probably really blow you out.
Okay.
So this is a whiskey I would start with. And actually, we'll get into the palate. For something that's only 40% alcohol by volume, this is actually a quite complex whiskey for something that's only 40%. All right, let's try it on the palate.
Okay.
What do we say?
Slovenia.
No. Slovakia.
Slovakia. No.
Here's Manurai. Slange Var.
Slange Var.
Slange Var.
All right.
Now we've tasted this one. Now let's go, without evaluating, let's go into the second sip and then we'll do our first evaluation of this whiskey. See what you get, all right?
Yeah.
All right, Slange Var.
Slange Var.
So I do get some citrus there. It's much more citrusy, if that's a word, on the nose than it is on the palate.
Yeah.
But for me, the maltiness shows up. There's that sort of like the dust of a box of Cheerios. Like when you finish a box of Cheerios and there's that dustiness from the Cheerios, I get that on there.
Okay, see, these are like flavor descriptors that are just so beyond what I'm used to, you know? So it's so interesting to me to, you know, dust out of a cereal box like that. I don't know any wines that might be a flavor note that I find. So, and you're so spot on, Eric, because, yeah, once you say it, it's just it's an aha moment. And that's why it's so important, even in wine or whatever you're studying, to taste with people who understand it, who are knowledgeable, because when they say something like dustiness from a cereal box, you can kind of have that aha moment and sort of connect what it is that's there that you're tasting to what the actual flavor sort of descriptor, that likeness of, is in the glass. So maltiness, that's another new one for me, and so I'm almost trying to get past that and trying to see what else is there. That's why I went to sort of some of that lemon that was there, because I was avoiding that because I didn't know I didn't realize that's one of the things I'm even looking for. So as soon as you said a maltiness, then I go, oh yeah, totally, yeah,
well, that cereal character to it. So I actually, in my everyday life, smell everything around me wherever I'm going and see if I can identify that. But yeah, that malty character there, it's not in your face, it's not real loud, but it's there, and it really lets me know this is a malted Scotch.
So smell everything.
Absolutely.
That's the way to live.
So what I'd like to do is let's jump to another Scotch real quick.
Just a quick Scotch.
Just another quick
yeah.
Scotch.
All right,
let's put these up to the side.
Sure.
Let's get Slammo. All right.
Yikes, that looks dangerous.
Alrighty. So this is the Glendronach Allardyce 18-year-old. The last whiskey we just had is a 12-year-old. The other one was Bourbon cask. This is done in Sherry-cask, 100% Oloroso sherry. And as you can tell from the color, it's a lot darker. So I'm just going to pour us a little bit here. So 90% of Scotch whiskeys are aged is a bourbon cask. That other 10% is mostly going to be sherry. And of the different types of sherry, Fino, Amontillado, Oloroso, Pelo Cantado, or Pedro Jimenez, most of that is going to be Oloroso. So let's try this one. Now you look at the color on that. Now this one, legally they could add color, but this is natural color, and this is a little higher ABV. The other ones were at 40%. This is at 46%.
Okay.
Which is sort of the cutting line as to where you want to be at.
What's the maximum? Is there a maximum that's allowed for the cutoff?
So generally they lose about 2% out of a cask per year. It's called angel share.
Angel share, we know that.
So on angel share, the part that gets lost to the air is the angel share.
Mm-hmm.
The part that gets stuck in the cask is the devil's cut. And the part that's in the glass is Erik's share.
All right.
And typically, depending on the climate, you're going to start reducing in alcohol in time. So cask strength, you can get a cask strength whiskey from Scotland. It's probably going to be 57 to 62. The spirit, when they put it into the cask, generally speaking, is going to be 63.5%.
Okay.
Now, why that specific number? It's so that it's an industry standard, because there are independent bottlers that buy spirit and put it into casks, or distilleries in Scotland trade cask, trade spirit. And so they have sort of a standard as to what you're trading, 63.5% alcohol by volume, but you're going to lose a little of that to evaporation. So you might find some that's 60, 60.1, somewhere on there at a cask strength, but typically it's 57 to 60 for a cask strength whiskey.
Okay.
It's not a legal maximum, it's just a possibility maximum. All right, so the first thing we notice here obviously is the color. It's almost like a root beer color, right?
Yeah.
So now on the nose, again, approach it like a hot cup of coffee.
Okay.
What do you get?
It almost is a bit of a cola on there.
Okay.
Yeah, it almost is a little bit of
So typically, for sherry cask, I get dried black fruit notes.
dried black fruit.
So figs,
Uh-huh.
dates, and raisins. Typically what I get off of that. It almost reminds me, it's like a fig compote. So, hold on.
Okay. He's pulling out the figs. He's pulling out the figs.
So this is a fig compote. If you wanted to train your nose to recognize those dried black fruit notes, see if you can find some fig compote or fig preserves or fig jam. Figs, dates, raisins, and stuff like that. And just start training your nose and your palate.
Smell everything. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, let's back to the whiskey.
Okay.
Now there are some descriptors that come up. Again, if you ever had panettone roll, because you're not Italian. I'm not Italian either, but panettone roll is a dark bread with little dried fruits on it, and they usually have some sort of glaze on it. And over in the UK, they have Christmas cake, which is the same thing. It's a dark bread cake with dried fruit notes in it that's sweet. So if you ever have panettone roll, if you're Italian, or if you have Christmas cake in the UK, this is hallmark, absolutely, in that category.
Wow. Break it down for me. What
There you
else?
go. Now again, because everything else is so strong, I get the maltiness there. I do get some coffee notes, dark coffee. I get a chocolate, but it's a chocolate that's been mixed with something else.
Yeah, so I think that's why I'm going back towards like root beer. Like it's funny because you said the color, and so I didn't want there to be that power of suggestion.
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, I was getting a little bit of like almost the way Zinfandel can do that root beer kind of thing.
Right.
You can get like a dusted cocoa, a root beer, a
sarsaparilla,
a Tootsie Roll,
right?
Like,
Tootsie Roll, absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
That's a little bit of the direction I was heading here. It did remind me of cola, and I feel like I'm going to be offensive when I say it, but almost like a watered down a little bit, like when I've had ice and cola, you know. So yeah, it does remind me a little of that. I am really reaching for I would say like raisins and all that, but figginess. Yeah, I feel you on the figginess.
So the root beer, if you ever try a natural root beer rather than say Fanta that's artificially colored, if you go get some natural root beer where they use the actual real ingredients for making root beer, that's a spot on descriptor of this.
Cool.
All right, let's try it on the palate.
Okay.
All right. What do we say?
There's
mud in your eyes.
Slange Var.
Slange Var.
I'm gonna get it by the end of this. Slange Var.
There you go.
Slange Var.
That is really different, eh?
Yeah.
So we've gone from citrus and apples and pears over into dried black fruit notes. And if you're familiar with sherry and drinking sherry, this is going to seem real familiar. Americans, we don't drink a whole lot of sherry. I do. I love sherry. But you get those dried black fruit notes. You get that coffee note. There's a little bit of a chocolate note there. And the spiciness there. A little bit of that root beer you were mentioning earlier. You get anything else?
Sort of a warmer kind of flavors in there. Deeper, darker flavors that are coming out.
It's also a little higher ABV, so it's a little bit more intense in terms of the alcohol. But it's definitely more earth-toned character to it.
Yeah, coffee and root beer all the way. Totally, yeah. Now, do you in assessing the quality here, is the finish playing any part of that, or is
absolutely
okay?
So not only in terms of aromas and flavors, how many do you have, just as we do with a wine, but how does it transition? What is it like in the front? What's it like in the middle? And what's it like in the finish? And how's the length of the finish?
So evolution is another
evolution.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just another way of displaying complexity in a whiskey.
Okay, so describe to me a little bit of the the spicy kind of, like what character of spiciness?
So when you think of baking spices, I think cinnamon, nutmeg, clove. Then if you have something like a baklava, if you ever have a baklava or the Turkish version of a baklava, you get the nuttiness and you get a combination of like a brown sugar note, and then you get the spices from the cinnamon and stuff like that, sort of a baked cinnamon character. And I get that very much in this.
Yeah.
So
when you said brown sugar, you kind of had me a little bit there.
It's a dark brown sugar note. The way, and I love baklava at Christmas time, and the honey note. I'm not necessarily getting any honey, but I'm getting those other characteristics. I really like this, but this is considered to be a sherry bomb.
Okay.
Because it's 100% sherry.
Okay.
Typical, you might have a whiskey that, say a 12-year-old, 10 years in bourbon, 2 years in sherry.
Okay. I gotta tell you, of the 3 so far that we've looked at, I actually like this.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I like this quite a bit. I think I'm just, and maybe it's because, you know, it is a bit more straightforward with some of the things that, A, that I'm used to, B, a flavor profile that I like, and C, that I was able to identify with pretty quickly there, you know? So I really love, like, this. It's kind of like for beers, I really do like darker beers as well.
Okay.
You know, I like those sort of...
like a porter or
porters
stout.
and stouts, you know, things that
Absolutely.
give you roastiness, coffee,
Yep.
you know, these deeper, you know, I like that richness to
Right.
it. So this is very attractive to me.
Right, it's definitely in that flavor profile in that camp there.
Cool.
So, you ready for some bourbon?
Am I ever? Yeah, let's do some bourbon.
Let's drink some water and then we'll get some bourbon. I'll
Let's
get you
do
some
that.
water.
Right. I usually move around so much
Right,
on camera,
yeah.
so it's going to be interesting to keep the dynamic
Yeah,
going.
you might be like
Yeah.
Jack Russell Terrier in the running around. Let's go fancy schmancy.
Let's do it.
Fancy schmancy and overpriced.
That's the that's actually the name of my autobiography.
Fancy schmancy and overpriced.
So where are we now?
So we're now back in the USA. We are in Kentucky, and this is Blantons. Blantons. This is John Wick's favorite bourbon. Have you ever seen the movie with
Yeah.
John Wick?
Right.
It makes an appearance. Very, very, very fancy bottle with a little horsey on there. And different bottles have different horses in different positions, so you get the whole lineup. They get the horse, or basically running along. When I first bought this, it was about $65, $70. They now go for, could be $175 to $200 a bottle.
Yeah.
They've become very, very popular. Bourbon has become extremely popular. I would say people are stuck in their houses, they're drinking more, and Americans are going for bourbon.
Mhm.
So there's been a huge increase in prices in bourbon, and certain bourbons have become sort of cult bourbons almost. So what is the difference between a bourbon and an Irish whiskey and a Scotch? Number one, it has to be at least 51% corn. It has to be aged in a new charred oak. It doesn't have to be American oak, but most do use American oak because it's cheaper than your European oak. The other ingredients, after you say you have minimum 51% corn, could be wheat, rye, and then barley. This is Maker's Mark bourbon. This is what's called a wheater. It doesn't use any rye, so you don't get those spicy notes. So the second highest ingredient after corn is wheat. The result is you get a much more bready, croissant, softer mouthfeel, super, super, super approachable, very soft bourbon. Versus a bourbon that uses a rye character in it, you're going to get more of the spice, the herbs, anise, black licorice, and that kind of character in there. So, and I'll show you one more, just to show you one more. We won't taste it, but I'll show it to you. So, this is a Redemption high rye barrel proof straight high rye bourbon, aged 9 years. So, the second largest component in this is rye. So, it has to be at least 51% corn, but the second largest component is rye. This is like hard root beer, sarsaparilla, black licorice, anise, herbs, and all that is coming from the rye.
This one would be my friend, I think.
And a real dangerous blend is get yourself a real natural root beer and blend it with a little bit of rye. Oh my God, it absolutely is fantastic. Fantastic.
Next video, we'll come back and do it.
A root beer and a high rye bourbon. Oh my goodness. In America, if it's 51% rye, it's a rye. If it's 51% corn, it's a bourbon. So you could change a whiskey from a bourbon into a rye just by changing by 2%.
Sheesh.
Which is a little weird.
Yeah, that's cool.
But anyway,
yeah.
all right. We'll save that for another time.
All right, that'll be next time.
And we'll get into the Blantons. Now, color-wise, you know that's 100% all from the corn and all from the cask.
Okay.
So on the nose, what do you get?
Yeah, this reminds me a little bit back to some of those first descriptors I was calling out, like a little bit of maybe this sort of apricot kind of thing.
Okay. So the first thing that jumps out for me, and of course I'm used to smelling these, is I get a caramel corn. It actually smells like corn. Not quite popcorn, but something sort of roasted corn note from the cask. It's more intense than what we had on the scotches. I get the baking spices there as well. Vanilla, huge amount of vanilla, a lot of vanilla on there. I get a little bit, and this is a little bit of a stretch, like those cheap, pocket apple pie notes. I get a little bit of that in there as well. I get peach cobbler. Of course, I could be convincing you all kinds of things, but I get peach cobbler, apple pie.
Okay, I guess, yeah, some of those, that's what I was saying. I think, like, the first things that I'm getting is those sort of apricots, peaches. There's even, for me, there might even be leaning towards, like, the idea of, like, honeys, things like that.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. I'm seeing a lot of, like, oranges and browns, on my palate, right?
Honey, absolutely, absolutely.
And then, the vanilla, once you called that, I was thinking, okay, yeah, totally. And again, for a lot of these, I'm getting a nuttiness as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So
more almondy, I would say.
And some bourbons, say like Booker's, you can almost go like right into peanut butter.
Okay.
Almost a peanut butter character. But that's not an uncommon trait in bourbons. You ready to go on the palate?
Yeah.
No, we don't. No, for bourbon, we don't say Slange Var.
Okay, well, no Slange Var, which I wouldn't have said anyway. What do we say?
I don't know. Whatever they say. Here's mud in your eye.
Yeah, mud in your
There's
eye.
mud in your eye. All right, there you go.
That was nice.
Wow. Okay.
Nice.
So this is higher ABV. This is 93 proof, which is 46.5% alcohol by volume.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more than the last Scotch we had. So in the United States, and I don't like the proof came from an old method of testing alcohol, which was quite explosive. So proof, basically cut the number in half, and that tells you what the ABV is.
You know what?
What?
I like this.
Okay, there you go.
You know what? It's like oaky. I'm getting almost like it reminds me of having like a red wine that has, really young, fresh oak on it. It's that sort of vanilla, almost cedary, right? I'm definitely getting these, the oak characteristics that are really nice.
So if you have, it's Mer, and I may not be pronouncing this correctly, Mer Soleil, MERSOLEIL, out of Monterey. Chardonnay. It's a barrel fermented and barrel aged Chardonnay.
Yeah.
This kind of goes in that sort of direction. If you've ever had one of those.
Yeah, and because of that sort of almost corn situation, what it reminds me a little bit is Sencha tea. I get a little bit of like that Sencha. It's got. Are you familiar? Yeah. Yeah. Sencha tea can give you this sort of like almost like a fresh, corn or something like that going with it too. The pinky's not going up.
We're going American.
All right, no,
American.
No, pinky's America. Got it.
Yeah.
You got me in my head going, and forever, I'm sure that's going to be how I taste.
So I would say, particularly for Americans, bourbons are very approachable, and the range of flavors you can get from a bourbon aren't quite as wide as with a Scotch.
Okay.
So with a Scotch, you have ex-bourbon cask, you have ex-sherry-cask, you can go peated, you can go non-peated, you could use other grains other than barley. There's regional differences. The breadth of different flavors from bourbon isn't quite as great. It's mostly by using different mash bills, how much wheat, how much rye, what percentage of corn you're using, how much barley you're using, and then aging in cask and then climate. And so those are going to be your biggest variations in your bourbon cask.
Yeah, now this is reminding me of like dried fruits.
Okay.
So, some of those, they're not quite gummies, but they're like dehydrated fruit.
Okay.
That's a little bit of what I'm getting, and it's still going to be in that sort of like, you can get like from the flea market, those apricot,
right.
It's maybe a little powdered a little bit, or something like that, and that's a little bit of where I'm at.
Now for me, summertime, I'm thinking whiskey for summertime. I like a high ABV bourbon on a ball of ice. When you put a bourbon on ice, some of the fruit characteristics will become less intense, but the barrel characteristics and the aging characteristics, the vanilla, the cinnamon, all that really becomes much more noticeable, and it can be like drinking melted French vanilla ice cream. Absolutely fantastic. Nothing better in the summertime.
Sounds good.
All right. So you ready to move on to our last and final one?
I think that's all I can handle. So let's do it.
Let's go to our last one. Man. How you doing, man? You need to take a break?
No, I think we're good. I think I can do this. Yeah.
Take your lower lip and pull it over your head, kind of a character too. Yeah. But it was a beautiful wine.
I'm distracting us. I'm bringing us back to wine. Okay, let's head back.
All right,
let's do it.
So let's get into Ardbeg. So we're finishing up with a Scotch, and the reason why we're doing this one last is because it's peated. And the reason why it's peated is traditionally, in terms of a fuel source, they didn't have a whole lot of trees, and they didn't have access to coal on the islands. They had coal in inlands, and when the train system was started, they were able to transport coal. But originally they would have used peat. Peat is decomposing vegetal matter. So it was a fuel source that's ubiquitous throughout Scotland. But
Peat is decomposing vegetal matter. Yum.
So you have Highland peat, which is going to have more heather and grasses. You're going to have island peat, which is going to have more seaweed and things coming up out of the ocean. Once coal was transportable through the railroads, they used less and less peat on the mainland, but they still continue to use it on the islands. So people have developed. It takes a little acquiring a taste for peated whiskey. Some people jump right into it. Some people never acquire a taste for it. I did right away, but some other people, it can take them a little bit of time.
Okay.
So this is from Islay, spelled like Islay. Islay is off the southwest coast of Scotland.
Here.
There are currently now 9 distilleries. There was 8 distilleries when I visited a couple years ago. While they do peated whiskeys in the Highlands and on the mainland, it's the islands that are more known for their peated whiskey. So my personal favorite distillery on Islay is Ardbeg. I'm a bit of a fanboy, hence all the bottles of Ardbeg over here. This is the 10-year-old. This is at 46% alcohol by volume, no added coloring. Goes for about $55. Which is a little bit jump. It used to be around $46. Pretty easy to find, easy to get your hands on. My personal opinion, I think it's one of the highest quality price ratio Scotch whiskeys that you can get, but you gotta love the peat. Alrighty, so let's get into it a little bit.
Gotta love the peat.
Gotta love the peat.
All right.
This also makes an excellent room freshener. You know, if you want a nice smoky smell to your room, the first thing you're gonna notice there is look how light in color it is. That's because they didn't add any coloring to it, and it's all ex-bourbon cask.
Wow, yeah, that looks like wine. I mean,
it almost looks like it has a slight green tinge to it, which could remind you of some Rieslings or Gewürztraminers, some cool climate wine in terms of the way it looks.
Yeah, that's pretty.
But then approach it slowly on the nose. And what do you get?
Jeez, yeah, right away. Holy moly. Yeah, that is just like campfire smoke.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Now, for me, this is not a summer whiskey. This is a sitting around by the fire, reading a book in the middle of cold winter. That's when I like this.
I gotta learn how to read. Yeah. Nice.
So the smoke is the first thing that's going to hit you. If you're patient, you can kind of work your way through it. It's a little bit like a lot of barbecue character in there. There is some fruit.
Yeah, and is it citrus fruit?
Yes, there is citrus fruit there. I got a little lemon and lime.
Yeah.
But this particular bottle is all the way down to here. When you first open a bottle, particularly with another distillery like Laphroaig, a bottle, just like with wine, they can take a little while to open up.
Okay.
So I don't evaluate a bottle of whiskey until I get it past the shoulder.
Oh, wow.
So I don't judge a whiskey by a neck pour. So if you just open the bottle, pour some in a glass, and let it sit there for a couple hours.
Okay, so
let it open up, just like decanting
still has
wine.
to do that.
Yeah, just like decanting a wine.
Well, is that why you see those like big glass jars? You know, or those just for show? You know.
Oh, the decanters for whiskeys.
Yeah.
If you want to serve really cheap whiskey to people who don't know Jack Diddley, put it in a fancy smancy decanter. So let's get back into this. So on the nose, we got the campfire smoke.
Campfire smoke.
We did get some citrus, got the lemon and lime.
Little lemon, little lime.
Something oceanic.
Something oceanic.
Yep. I get a salty sea breeze, slightly medicinal, iodine character to it. Go spend some time on the beach. We have rotting vegetable matter. It's washed up on the shore, the seaweed, with some crustaceans. It's been there for a while, and it's starting to get a little fragrant. Got the little gnats floating around it, you know, because it hasn't washed back out to sea yet. Get a little bit of that in there.
Yeah, we're telling a little story here. Yeah.
A little ashy, like the fire has gone out. but I also get a little bit of chocolate note, a little dark chocolate note on that as well. But that saltiness, that tells you, hey, I came from someplace near the ocean.
Okay, cool.
Now you're brave enough to try it on the palate?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right,
Yeah.
Slange Var.
Slange Var.
There we go. Now, for some people, peated whiskey, people fall immediately in love with it. Some people have to acquire a taste for it. You know, you eventually have to work your way into it. And then for some people, they never like it. And if you mention peated whiskey, they're just disgusted by it. Don't necessarily expect people always to jump right into it. But for me, I have always loved peated whiskey. And if I was going to drink one style of Scotch whiskey, it would be peated whiskey.
Wow. Okay. I'm having a problem with it. And the reason—
Get out of my house! Get out!
Okay, the reason why I'm having an issue here is my palate is so trained to find this as a flaw in wine.
Right.
So that, and I actually have that same experience with some sakes, because some lighter style sakes almost taste like oxidized white wine. Like it's like this is like a Viognier that's just, you know, got the orange blossom, that's just been on the table for 7 days, right? And so it's a little oxidized kind of flavors in there. And then with this, so we recently came out of in California, you know, fires in the vineyard where I work, and I've had to taste, you know, some of those wines and just cry over losing the vintage. And I get the smokiness on it. It's just like, ah, man, we've lost this vintage. So I'm having memories. That's just where I go. And so I can't quite appreciate that just yet. But certainly it comes on really beautiful. It's the first thing that hits me, but it does come on in a very gentle, beautiful way when it does hit the palate.
Something as the bottle will open up, and particularly say with like a little Freud tin, I get a chocolate covered mint, like York's peppermint patty on the back end. So what lingers for me is the smoke, the ash, but also a sort of chocolate covered mint character on the back end of that.
Okay, yeah, there is a brightness for sure.
Right.
And I really didn't expect some of that sort of limey characteristic to translate on the palate, and it did. That's kind of nice.
The mint, the lemon lime. Again, this is an acquired taste. Some people like it right away. Some people don't. And we're probably in the upper 80s in terms of the temperature today. It's a little warm. And this would taste better on a colder day.
Okay.
You might come back to this in the middle of winter and find, and if you like cigars, this can be an absolutely fantastic pairing with cigars.
Right on. This is super cool. I think I definitely found a little bit more of an appreciation. I like the bourbon. I actually like the bourbon. That was quite nice. And then just before that, we have the darker
Glendronach 18-year-old Allardyce, 100% Sherry-cask.
Okay, yeah, that I actually thought was really cool. Like I said, it kind of reminded me of like darker style beers, you know, porters and stouts. I like the flavor profile on that, I would say.
Now we've also sort of rushed your palate with a huge range of flavors.
Okay.
With a lot of different styles, a lot of different. So normally we just pick one whiskey, stick with that one, and get to know that one, become familiar with that one. So we've also sort of it's like going from classical to opera to heavy metal to punk. To, you know, we're jumping the genres of styles of music all at the same time.
This is music. Right.
Exactly. But so anyway, so it's been great getting together. I hope you explore whiskey a little bit more. Always, my door is always open. Hopefully we can do this again sometime, or I can come visit you and we can do something like this and explore whiskey. And because there's a lot more out there to explore.
Yeah, this is cool. I got to get you back over and get you back in wine. I'm gonna loop you back in. Thanks so much, Eric. This was really cool. Thanks for your hospitality. You only had a couple things to choose from today. I forgive you for that, but otherwise, this was definitely a great crash course. So, what can I say? But if you enjoyed what you saw here today, please leave me a like. That helps a lot. Don't forget to check out Erik Wait's channel.
Erik Wait Whisky Studies.
Erik Wait Whisky Studies. You can check him out. I love your presentation style. You do a great job. So thank you so much. And until next time, winos, definitely drink safe. And definitely drink well.
Slange Var!
Slange Var!
Slange Var!